So before this video begins, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to my sister for helping me do some of the animations in the video. There's a very cool mushroom animation inside of it that she did, and also a very angry statue animation inside of it that she helped me with. Yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright, so week 13. The primary focus this week was getting the second level of the statue zone finished up and completed, what I like to call the statue road. So, I've actually designed for this level lying around my notebook for a while. I just actually had to go in and implement the design, right? The first area of this design, the first node, as I like to think about it, features an OR gate for a door. So what do I mean by an OR gate? I have two statues, and either statue will open the door into the next area. So I figured that I could use this door and separate the two statues and two separate groups of enemies on each side of the statue. That way you had lots of interesting decisions with this OR gate, right? Do you fight the enemy on the left side first? Do you fight the enemies on the right side first? Maybe you don't notice the enemies, so then you trigger the OR gate door, and then one enemy comes in and they start attacking you, and you're in the middle of this like frantic combat situation. Or maybe you go, before opening the door at all, you go attack both enemies, and then you start singing to open the door, right? Lots of interesting decisions come from this OR gate, and I think that's good. At least that was the theory anyways. In practice, it didn't work out that way, which is really disappointing. The statue switches had to be too close to the door because the player couldn't see them otherwise. So they were farther away, then the more combat encounters would be possible because you'd have more space to fight, right? But that's just not how it ended up working. In addition to that, the spider enemies, excuse me, not the statue enemies, the player fights in this area, they don't see far enough to be useful, because if they're too close to the door, then the player can't fight them because the statue gets in the way, because they can't move and sing at the same time, right? So I can't have the spiders directly inside the statues, and if they're farther away, then they can't see the player, and the player can't see them, so it's not necessarily a fun combat encounter. So it didn't really work out like I wanted it to. It is still fun, though. The zone is still fun, I think. It's fun to go through, and it's fun to interact with everything, but it's not necessarily as fun or as intricate as I really hoped it would be. So in the future, I'm definitely going to have to go in and maybe make an additional zone where I reconstruct these ideas, but I iterate upon them slightly. So maybe I could use a different enemy other than the main spider enemy. I really have to get an enemy that's not just the spider enemy as a normal enemy and not a corrupted enemy, right? Something other than Tarantula and the spider. But yeah, that's the first zone. So in the first zone, you have to complete both of the statues before moving on to the next zone, because there's also an AND door that's locked until both statues are open. Once you do that, you move on to the statue enemy zone. So this is the first time the player is thrown up against the statue enemy without anything holding it back, right? It's just this one statue enemy, nothing preventing you from fighting it, nothing preventing it from fighting you. It's just you and this thing here to duke it out. Now, I had to give the player a lot of space for this fight, because you have to be really careful the first time you throw a new enemy at the player, especially the first time you're taking the reins off. If it's too difficult or there's too many things in the way, it could be really, really hard, and it could be really daunting for the player. So, lots of space, because the more space there is, the easier it is for the player to move, and the easier it is for them to fight. There's also lots of trees sprinkled around the space, because by now in the game, at least by this point in the game, I would hope the player would know that they could use the burrow ability of the rabbit to go underneath the trees. The statue switch cannot do that. It can't follow you underneath trees. So all of those trees are areas the player can go through that will catch up the statue switch, and the player can't follow it. Additionally, there's lots of lurkers scattered around this area, because an enemy that goes over the lurker obviously is going to get damaged, right? And this statue switch enemy will get one shot by these lurkers that are lurking around. So, lurkers that are lurking around. So, while it might seem that it's the first time the reins are taken off, there's still a lot of things in this area to hopefully ease the fight a little bit and make it not directly hands-on, only you and this thing, right? The other thing to notice about this zone is that off to the left, there's this door here, and there's no switch to open this door in the zone, and I did that intentionally. So hopefully when the player sees it, they'll go, hang on, where's this switch, right? And that actually brings me to the next zone. So the next node that I have is two separate paths. You have two options. You either have a hard path to go down with lots of enemies. I mean, it's very obvious there are more enemies in this path. Or you have a simple path to go down with a few lurkers. And obviously, lurkers don't attack you, so they're always the easier enemy to deal with. Now, in the harder path, there's a switch hidden for the door that I previously mentioned, right? A player who is willing to put in the extra effort to go fight the enemies and go explore will hopefully find that switch and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe this goes back to that door before they'll have a fun little aha moment where they realize that this is a little puzzle thing, and this is how I connect it to get into the next area. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I wanted at the other end of that door, because if you hide a secret, there has to be something meaningful and worthwhile in it, right? And I realized that it kind of reminded me of the previous zone, because I knew I had a secret hidden there, right? If you look at the top area of that zone, there's a house hidden there that's off on a separate floating island. And on that island, I have a zone marker that indicates you can get to it from another zone. So I figured maybe the player could put two and two together and realize, hey, maybe there's a way to get to this house from the next zone. So I figured, what if I have that as the reward for this secret? You get access to the secret from the other zone, and then inside this house, I could hide something really cool. So maybe an entirely different level themed around, like, mushrooms and cellars, because you're going underground now, right? That would make a lot of sense for rabbits, having like this underground level of mushrooms. I can even have like a special mushroom enemy that gets corrupted, and then maybe the mushroom enemy spawns other mushrooms because the corruptor kind of looks like spores when it corrupts things. And I don't know, cool stuff. It's definitely something to implement into the future, this sort of mushroom level and mushroom area, but not something that I'm going to work on now because I'm focusing primarily on the statue genre. I'm definitely going to have to go back in and have that fleshed out later. But yeah, so that's the second node. Finally, once you get past this branch node, you come to the double statue enemy. This is harkening back to the mechanic introduction, mechanic iteration, mechanic twist zone, right? This is the twist of the mechanic. You just fought a single statue, now there's two of them there, right? So now you're going to have to fight two statues at the same time. And this area, again, has a very big zone. I think it's almost bigger than the last zone, actually. And this is intentional. Two of these statues is really hard to fight. One of them is hard enough, two is even harder. And I took a lot of time to make sure it wasn't too hard. I did the fight, and I completed the fight with only getting hit maybe once. So a player who is familiar with the game can absolutely defeat these two statue enemies. It's not too difficult. It is not easy. I will not say it's easy. I have a hard time fighting these statue enemies, and obviously I made the game. So they're really, really hard, but they are not impossible. You can do it. You can do it consistently if you have the right skill. And I tested here. I spent a lot of time fighting these guys to make sure. So yeah, in order to finish the next zone, you have to beat both statues, and then you obviously have to complete the song of each statue switch in order to open the door and move on to the next zone, which will be who knows what. I have yet to decide how to figure out what it is. So that's pretty much it for this week. These weeks are they're really light because college is starting to pick back up, especially as finals week is coming up closer and closer and closer. All the classes are like, hey, you got a lot of homework there from other classes. You know what you need? More homework. So, yeah, that's life right now. But hopefully next week I'll get the next zone finished. And then I have lots of ideas floating around my head for the boss for this zone. Because I know there has to be a boss and it has to be themed around statues. But what that means is a little iffy right now, right? I don't necessarily have a complete idea for it finished. I kind of am thinking that maybe this boss will have an ability that will turn you into a statue, and then you have to use the singing mechanics you'll use for the statues up till this point to de-statuefy yourself. So you sing to break yourself out of the statue shell, which is a very Medusa-like mechanic for the boss to have, right? But I don't necessarily want to go down the Medusa route because that's the enemy of the game is spiders. It's not snakes. So maybe I could do like one of my friends suggested I could do Medusa with spider hair instead of snake hair. But I really don't know if I don't have the Medusa route. Maybe I do. Maybe it'll be cool. And they know better than I do. Who knows? They do a lot of the time. But yeah, so definitely designing that statue boss enemy. But the primary thing next week is add another zone to the statue zone, because there's just not enough there right now. I did one and maybe two more zones to the statue area to really make it feel more unique and larger, so there's something there to explore, right? There's more stuff. But once I add that in, I'm going to be really happy with it. We'll have finished the statue zone. I feel like it was just a few weeks ago where we were saying, we need to work on the statue zone. We need to work on the statue zone. Now we're 2 levels into it and we're almost done. Whew, good stuff. I think definitely a lot of time in game design, right? You spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks working on systems and systems